A pale grey light crept across the eastern horizon, just enough to reveal movement in the fog-drenched lowlands. The mist lay thick and heavy, clinging to the earth like a living thing, swallowing sound and shape alike. Out of it emerged the first silhouettes, angular, deliberate, unmistakably military. Armored vehicles rolled forward in disciplined columns, their engines kept low, vibrations traveling through the frozen soil rather than the air. Tracks pressed deep into the mud, leaving scars that would not fade quickly. This was not a hastily assembled force. This was precision made visible. The brigade had a reputation long before it ever reached this stretch of contested land. Within Russian military circles, its name carried weight, spoken with a mix of pride and quiet intimidation. These were not conscripts pulled from distant regions with minimal training. These were professionals, veterans of earlier campaigns, men shaped by years of drills, live-fire exercises, and real combat. Their equipment reflected that status. Modern body armor hugged their frames, helmets bristled with mounted optics, and rifles were customized with attachments chosen through experience rather than theory. Every piece of gear had been tested, adjusted, and trusted. They moved with the confidence of soldiers who believed they were prepared for anything. As dawn edged closer, the column grew clearer. Tanks led the way, their turrets scanning methodically, barrels steady and unforgiving. Infantry fighting vehicles followed, hatches sealed, crews communicating in clipped bursts over encrypted channels. Behind them came logistics trucks and mobile command units, the lifeline that allowed the spear to keep pushing forward. The formation was tight but fluid, a choreography refined through countless rehearsals. Each unit knew its place, its timing, its role in the larger plan. Inside one of the lead vehicles, a commander studied a digital map glowing faintly in the dim interior. Colored markers indicated objectives, estimated enemy positions, and planned routes of advance. The plan itself was ambitious but, on paper, achievable. Intelligence suggested weakened Ukrainian defenses in the sector, units stretched thin after weeks of pressure elsewhere. Speed and shock were meant to do the rest. The brigade's task was simple in wording, if not in execution: break through, exploit the gap, and force a collapse deeper along the line. The commander adjusted his headset and issued a brief order. The column maintained its pace. Outside, the fog shifted as the vehicles passed, momentarily revealing flashes of red insignia on sleeves and armor plates. The symbol was small but unmistakable, a quiet declaration of identity and purpose. Some soldiers glanced toward the horizon, where the sky was beginning to warm with faint traces of color. Others kept their eyes forward, fingers resting near triggers, senses tuned for the slightest irregularity. Jokes were absent. There was no chatter for morale. This was the calm focus that came before contact. The landscape itself offered no comfort. Fields once used for farming lay churned and ruined, dotted with the skeletal remains of buildings that had not survived earlier fighting. Tree lines stood broken and uneven, branches snapped or burned, providing cover that could never be trusted. Every rise in the ground, every darkened ditch, carried the possibility of unseen eyes watching, measuring, waiting. Yet the brigade advanced as though the land belonged to them already, as though resistance was something that would reveal itself only to be crushed. Above them, unseen behind layers of cloud, aircraft and drones moved along invisible paths. Electronic warfare units worked silently, attempting to blind enemy sensors and disrupt communications. Signals officers monitored streams of data, reassured by the steady flow of information. Everything appeared to be functioning as designed. The machine was running smoothly. For many of the soldiers, this was supposed to be the decisive phase. The operation had been framed as a turning point, a demonstration of overwhelming force and professionalism. Success here would validate months of preparation and sacrifice. Failure, though rarely spoken aloud, was treated as an abstract concept, something that happened to other units, in other places, under different circumstances. A young sergeant riding in the back of an infantry vehicle checked the faces of his squad. Some stared straight ahead, expressions unreadable. Others closed their eyes briefly, conserving energy, replaying drills in their minds. He felt the familiar tightening in his chest, the blend of anticipation and unease that always arrived just before things became irreversible. He trusted his men. He trusted the training. He trusted the brigade. That trust, reinforced again and again, was what allowed him to sit there calmly as the vehicle lurched forward through the mist. The fog began to thin as the sun climbed higher, revealing more of the terrain ahead. A narrow road cut through the fields, flanked by shallow embankments and scattered trees. It was an obvious route, but alternatives were limited. Engineers had cleared it of mines hours earlier, or so the reports claimed. The lead tank adjusted slightly, aligning itself with the road center, its commander scanning through optics that turned distance into clarity. Nothing happened. Minutes passed. The column advanced deeper, kilometer by kilometer, the sense of inevitability growing stronger. Radio traffic remained routine. No alarms, no sudden warnings. If the enemy was present, they were quiet, too quiet, perhaps, but silence alone was not proof of danger. It could just as easily mean withdrawal, confusion, fear. In the distance, the faint outline of a village emerged, its rooftops barely visible through lingering haze. That was one of the first objectives. Securing it would provide cover and a foothold for the next phase of the advance. Orders were already being prepared, squads assigned sectors, fire support coordinated in advance. The brigade was not reacting, it was executing. Yet beneath the surface confidence, subtle cracks began to form, small enough to ignore, easy to rationalize. A drone feed flickered momentarily before stabilizing. A sensor reported interference, then cleared. An operator frowned but said nothing. These things happened. War was never perfectly clean. The sun finally broke through the clouds, casting pale light across the advancing force. For a brief moment, the scene looked almost serene, steel and discipline cutting through a wounded landscape, a display of power moving with purpose and precision. It was the image planners and commanders liked to imagine, the kind that ended up in briefings and state media, order imposed on chaos, strength advancing without hesitation. What no one in that column could see was how closely they were being watched. From concealed positions far ahead and to the flanks, eyes followed their movement. Coordinates were checked and rechecked. Timers were set. The very discipline and predictability that defined the brigade's strength also made it readable, its rhythm easy to map. The fog that had protected their approach now lifted, not as a gift, but as a signal. Still, the brigade pressed on, unaware that the opening act of its deployment was already complete. The elite force had arrived exactly where it was expected, exactly when it was anticipated. The stage was set, the players in position, and the silence that accompanied their advance was not the absence of danger, but the pause before it arrived. It was sharper, tighter, an abrupt tearing of the air that arrived almost simultaneously with the flash. For a fraction of a second, the world seemed to split open ahead of the lead vehicles, light blooming where the road narrowed between two shallow embankments. Then the shockwave hit, slamming into steel and flesh alike, flattening grass and ripping loose soil into the air. The forward tank lurched violently, its tracks lifting off the ground before crashing back down at an awkward angle. Radio channels erupted. Shouted warnings overlapped with automated alerts as systems registered impacts and failures. The calm, controlled cadence that had defined the advance shattered instantly, replaced by urgency and confusion. Smoke surged upward, thick and black, rolling back toward the column like a living wall. Through it came the echo of secondary detonations, fuel igniting, ammunition cooking off, metal tearing itself apart. "Contact front," someone yelled, the words clipped and strained. Another voice cut in, reporting damage, then vanished mid-sentence. The ambush had begun. From positions invisible just moments earlier, precision fire rained down. Artillery rounds landed not randomly, but with terrifying intent, striking key points along the column. A second vehicle took a direct hit, its turret blown sideways in a violent spray of sparks and debris. Infantry fighting vehicles veered off the road, drivers desperately trying to escape the kill zone, only to find the surrounding ground soft, uneven, and unforgiving. Above the battlefield, a faint buzzing grew louder. Drones, small, fast, and numerous, slipped through the smoke, their presence betrayed only by the brief glint of light off spinning rotors. They hovered, adjusted, and then dipped sharply as they released their payloads. Explosions blossomed atop vehicles that had survived the initial barrage, punching through thinner armor, igniting exposed equipment. Each strike was followed by another, relentless and methodical. Inside one transport, soldiers were thrown against the walls as the vehicle skidded violently. Lights flickered. Someone screamed as shrapnel tore through the compartment, hot fragments biting into metal and flesh. The sergeant who had checked his squad moments earlier forced himself upright, blood running down the side of his helmet. He shouted orders, though he wasn't sure anyone could hear him over the noise. The rear ramp shuddered as something slammed into it from outside. "Out! Out! Move!" he yelled, instinct taking over. The ramp dropped into chaos. Smoke burned the eyes, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. The ground was littered with debris, twisted metal, shattered glass, fragments of gear blown free in the blasts. Somewhere to the left, a vehicle burned fiercely, flames licking skyward, sending a column of black smoke that marked the brigade's position like a beacon. As infantry spilled into shallow ditches and behind whatever cover they could find, the second phase of the ambush unfolded. Mortar rounds began to fall, their dull thumps and whistling descents filling the air with a sense of inevitability. Each impact sent dirt and shrapnel raining down, forcing soldiers to press themselves flat against the earth. Communications degraded rapidly. Electronic interference surged, static chewing through orders and reports. Command units struggled to regain situational awareness as screens filled with conflicting data, drone feeds dropping out, GPS signals jumping erratically. What had been a coordinated advance fractured into isolated pockets of resistance and survival. One tank crew attempted to bring their main gun to bear on a suspected firing position near a tree line. Before they could fire, a drone plunged toward them, striking the top of the turret. The explosion was smaller than the artillery impacts but devastatingly precise. The turret went silent. Moments later, smoke poured from its hatches. The ambush was no longer just fire, it was choreography. Ukrainian forces shifted positions with speed and confidence, exploiting every moment of disarray. As some Russian units tried to push forward to escape the kill zone, fresh strikes cut off their path. Others attempted to pull back, only to find routes already targeted. The road that had promised speed and efficiency now trapped steel and men in a narrow corridor of destruction. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once. Seconds felt endless as explosions thundered nearby, while minutes vanished unnoticed amid the struggle to breathe, to move, to stay alive. Training kicked in where it could, but even elite preparation strained under the sheer intensity of the assault. A squad took cover behind the wreckage of an overturned vehicle, its armor peeled open like a crushed can. One soldier tried to apply a tourniquet to a wounded comrade, hands shaking as blood soaked into the dirt. Another scanned the sky, firing short bursts at shapes darting above, though the drones remained frustratingly elusive. Every shot felt futile, swallowed by smoke and noise. Orders came through intermittently, fragmented and urgent. Hold position. Regroup if possible. Return fire. Each instruction collided with reality on the ground, where visibility was poor and the enemy seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Commanders made decisions with incomplete information, reacting rather than directing. Then the artillery shifted again. Rounds began landing deeper within the formation, striking support vehicles and command elements that had been thought safely behind the lead units. Antennas collapsed, vehicles burned, and the fragile threads holding the brigade together snapped one by one. Without coordination, even the most capable units became vulnerable, their strength diluted by isolation. The psychological weight of the ambush pressed down hard. This was not the chaotic, imprecise fire many had expected. It was deliberate, adaptive, and unforgiving. The realization spread quickly, unspoken but deeply felt. They had walked into something carefully prepared, something designed specifically for them. A lieutenant crouched beside a shattered embankment, trying to raise higher command on a backup channel. Static answered him. He slammed his fist against the dirt in frustration, then froze as another explosion rocked the ground nearby. He forced himself to breathe, to focus, to think beyond the instinct to panic. Around him, his men waited, eyes searching his face for direction he wasn't sure he could give. Smoke drifted and shifted, briefly revealing the road ahead. It was unrecognizable now, a jagged line of craters, burning vehicles, and scattered bodies. The sense of momentum that had carried the brigade forward hours earlier was gone, replaced by a desperate struggle to stabilize a situation that was unraveling faster than anyone could contain. Some units attempted counterfire, calling in their own artillery to suppress the ambush sites. A few salvos landed, kicking up earth along distant tree lines. But the enemy fire did not stop. It adjusted, recalibrated, found new angles. The drones kept coming, tireless and precise, turning any moment of exposure into an opportunity. As the fighting raged, the realization slowly dawned on those still able to think beyond the immediate chaos. This was not a single strike meant to harass or delay. This was an operation designed to break them, to dismantle the brigade piece by piece, to strip away its advantages and leave only fragments behind. The ambush had achieved its first and most critical goal. The elite force was no longer advancing as one. It was fighting to survive, pinned down, bleeding time and strength with every passing minute. And somewhere beyond the smoke and fire, unseen eyes continued to watch, measure, and decide where the next blow would fall. The silence that had greeted the brigade's approach that morning was gone forever. In its place was the relentless roar of a battlefield that had turned against them, signaling that the true cost of this operation was only beginning to reveal itself.